Okay, so have you ever spent years, and I mean years, studying a language? You know all the grammar, but then you find yourself totally tongue-tied when you actually try to use it? Yeah, you are not alone. Today, we're going to dive into an approach that's all about bridging that gap between knowing a language and actually speaking it. Let's get into it.
Right, let's kick things off with a scenario that for a lot of us probably hits a little too close to home. It's this weird paradox that happens all the time in language learning, and it goes a little something like this.
I mean, come on, you know this feeling, right? You've aced every single grammar test, you've got stacks of vocabulary flashcards, but there you are, standing in this awesome cafe abroad, and the words just won't come out. You're a total grammar whiz on paper, but a completely speechless tourist when it really matters.
This slide just lays it all out, doesn't it? On the left, you've got everything from traditional language class, memorizing verb charts, getting perfect grammar on paper, racking up those high test scores. But on the right, that's the real stuff. That's why we learn a language in the first place, to give directions, to haggle at a market, to actually make a new friend. It's this huge gap that a whole new approach was designed to fix.
So, the big question is, how do we fix this? How do we bridge that gap? Well, you do it by flipping the entire traditional model right on its head. Instead of learning all the rules and then hoping you can use them, you start by actually using the language. This is the whole idea behind something called task-based language teaching, or TBLT for short.
Now here's the absolute key. A task in TBLT isn't just another boring worksheet or a grammar drill. No way. It's a real-world activity that has a real, meaningful outcome. Think about things like planning a trip with a friend, solving a puzzle together, or even putting together a presentation. You're not just studying the language, you're using it like a tool to get something done. In this quote, this gets right to the heart of it all. It's a huge shift in thinking. It's not about having a perfectly polished, grammatically correct sentence at the end. It's all about the messy, kind of chaotic, but beautiful process of actually communicating. You know, the back and forth, the trial and error, that's where the real learning happens.
Okay, so that's the theory. But what does this actually look like in a classroom? Let's just walk through a really simple but super powerful example of a TBLT lesson, trying to plan a weekly schedule with a partner.
So a TBLT lesson usually works in this really natural three-part cycle. First, you've got the pre-task. This is where the teacher sets the scene, introduces the topic, and maybe gives you a few key words to get you started. But, and this is important, they don't give you a script. Then you jump into the task cycle. This is where you get to work. You're in your groups, using whatever language you've got to get the job done. The goal is just to communicate. And finally, you have the language focus. This is where you kind of step back and reflect. After the task is finished, the whole class looks at the language that popped up, what worked, and maybe where people got stuck. The grammar lesson actually comes from the experience you just had.
And, you know, the best part of TBLT is how creative it can be. You might do something called a jigsaw task, where everyone in your group gets a different piece of a story and you have to talk to piece it all together. Or maybe an information gap task, where I have info on a map that you need, so we have to communicate. Then you've got decision-making tasks, where you solve a problem as a group, and opinion exchange tasks, which are all about just sharing ideas. See? Each one creates a real, genuine need to talk.
I mean, just look at the energy here. These students are not just sitting there memorizing rules. They're actually collaborating, they're problem-solving, and they're using language to build something together. This is where the magic of TBLT really comes to life.
Okay, so we've seen TBLT in action, but what's the secret sauce? Why is this approach so incredibly effective? Well, the answer is actually rooted in some really powerful ideas about how our brains are wired to learn.
It really all boils down to two big ideas. First is the theory of language, TBLT, sees language as a tool for making and sharing meaning, not just a bunch of abstract rules to memorize. And second is the theory of learning. It's based on the idea that we learn a language best when we are actively using it to communicate, to negotiate meaning, and, yeah, even to make a bunch of mistakes along the way.
Honestly, if there is one thing to take away from all this, it's this right here. In a lot of traditional language classes, being able to communicate is treated like the final destination, right? The end goal. But in TBLT, it's the journey itself. You start trying to communicate from day one, and it's that very process that powers your learning.
So you can probably guess that this big shift in method also means a pretty big shift in the classroom vibe. The old school roles of teacher and student get completely reimagined.
The teacher stops being a lecturer at the front of the room and becomes more of a facilitator, like a designer of experiences who guides everyone. And you,
The student, you transform from this passive listener into an active, creative participant. You become a risk-taker, an innovator, and you start monitoring your own learning. It's all about empowering you to take ownership of your language skills.
So what's the big takeaway when we put this all together? Well, it really just boils down to a super simple but really profound idea. We learn best by doing.
And the benefits of doing it this way, they're huge. You'll find you're way more motivated because the tasks actually feel relevant. You build real, actual confidence because you're succeeding at communication, not just the test. And maybe the most important thing is, you'll be so much better prepared to use your language skills out in the real world because that's what you've been practicing all along.
So, I'll just leave you with this question to think about. If learning by doing is really the key to mastering a language, what other skills could we unlock with this same approach? The possibilities are pretty much endless, right? Thanks for joining me on this little tour of task-based language teaching.